Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton, HurricaneTrack.com here. Time for the Hurricane Outlook and discussion, and this is a big one. The 1st of November here. It's very busy out there, very active start. We've got Lisa threatening to become a hurricane as it heads towards Belize. And then we've got Martin out there in the open Atlantic. Plus, as the title card says, the possibility of even more development as we move through the first 10 days of November. Very busy here. A lot of important stuff to get through, so let's get started, shall we? First, let's take a look back in time at the historic record. Our good friend and supporter over in Bermuda, Howard, putting together this retrospective look back all the way to 1851 and the points of origin. Let's go over here to November 1st through the 10th, and then the middle of the month, and then the last third of the month. He added all up. And yes, well, let's get a color that pops out there better. Yes, the Atlantic Basin can be active in November. There is a cluster down here over time that has developed in the Western Caribbean, and then a more sporadic and widely dispersed area out across the subtropical Atlantic. And then, yes, there can even be development in the Eastern Pacific, but by and large, the Atlantic here gets the big check mark for potentially being active in November. It just depends on the setup. And as it turns out, this year's setup is quite favorable. How do I mean? Well, we've got the La Nina here in the Pacific. That's favorable. That reduces the wind shear across the Caribbean especially. Speaking of the Caribbean, it is warmer than average. The North Atlantic still much warmer than average. All of that gives us a very favorable background state. And then just looking at the actual sea surface temperatures, that previous map, those were the departures from the long-term average. Our actual sea surface temperatures, look, there's the 26 Celsius line right there, or about 80 Fahrenheit or so. And yeah, everything south of that is warm enough to get development. And Martin, by the way, is located roughly up in here over marginally warm enough water temperatures. So why is it a tropical storm? You may be wondering. Well, we'll get to that when we look at the satellite close-up of Martin in just a second. I'll do my best to explain. First, though, here's Lisa, the 2 p.m. Eastern Time intermediate advisory stat, 60 miles per hour, 1001 pressure moving west at 15 miles per hour. And from the 11 o'clock advisory, there are no intermediate advisories when there are not watches and warnings in effect. So this is the 11 a.m. stats for Martin. 50 mile per hour winds, 997 on the pressure, moving east at, what does that say, 12 miles per hour. Now look, here's a very interesting tweet and set of statistics for you from our good friend Phil Klotzbach. So the National Hurricane Center, as he says, is forecasting both Lisa and Martin to be at hurricane strength at the same time. 2 seasons have had that happen before. 1932, I wasn't around then, and then 2001. I was definitely around at that point, and I was even down in the Keys for that one reference storm there, Michelle. Powerful, Category 4. Kind of moved across like that roughly. I went down to the Keys for it. Got a little bit on the northern periphery of the effects there, some tropical storm conditions. That's about it. Way back in the early part of my career, lucky for me, Michelle, and for the people in Florida, went through the Bahamas. Unlucky for those folks. Story for another day. But it was a good thing that I didn't get into those Category 4 conditions. But yes, the bottom line, it's only happened a couple of times. It's a rare thing. And we might do it again here with Lisa and Martin both potentially becoming hurricanes at the same time. We would add that to 1932 and to 2001. 2022 may become the third occurrence. We shall see. So, what do we got? Well, here's Lisa. We'll talk about that first. Here's our interactive track map. We'll zoom in for you. The current setup, here it is here. Again, 60 mile per hour winds moving off to the west. Forecast officially the center to make landfall here south of Belize City, which is right there. All right, I know a lot of people down in Belize here quite concerned, as you should be. Now, the one good thing is, let me pop me back up on here so I can talk to you and not just at you. Lisa is not a large hurricane. That's the good part. But being small, it could ramp up rather quickly. So you see that 1 there, this little 1 right here. Click on it, and it says 90 miles per hour. That's the forecast. Right before landfall tomorrow night into Thursday. All right, Thursday, November 3rd, or 0Z tomorrow night, whichever way you want to look at it. Wednesday into Thursday. 90 miles per hour. Here's what I want you to do. If you're in Belize and you're worried about this situation, just plan on a category higher. Plan on 100. That's a category 2, or even 110 miles per hour, and just plan up. That way you don't have to play catch up. Because we still have 36 hours, a lot can happen, absolutely. This track will change. And by the way, the blue cone here, that's just the probability area of where the center is most of the time. This cone tells us nothing of the impacts. As an example, if this comes in exactly as forecast, this area to the north of where the center makes landfall would receive the highest surge. To the right, to the north on this particular orientation of the track, that's where your onshore flow would be, and that's where the highest surge would occur. The core of Lisa will probably be very small. I'll show you that on one of the models here in just a moment. But just remember, this can change. It's going to change. It's natural for it to change. The atmosphere is always changing and evolving. So if you're in Belize City and you're looking at this and you're saying, come on, that one there, the category 1, no big deal. It's well to the south of Belize City. Well, let me tell you, that could change drastically both with the intensity and its location as time progresses. So just be ready for that, all right? All right, so looking at the, I don't know what it's trying to download there. Looking at the, it threw me off here. The satellite imagery of the entire North Atlantic Basin. There's Lisa getting better organized, the well-established outflow here. There's Tropical Storm Martin. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. How could there be a tropical storm that far north over fairly cool water temperatures? I'll show you in just a second. First, though, this is important. Lisa definitely getting better organized. You see these upper level clouds fanning out in a clockwise fashion. That is the outflow. It's getting that more curved, banded look to it, trying to develop a core. It's getting there. It's trying, and it's got time. Look, I don't want to sound doom and gloom, but we know 36 hours is forever in the world of tropical cyclones. It really is. That's plenty of time for a system that's ramping up to continue to do so. And what are the things going for it? I showed you the upper level outflow. That is established. The water temperatures are warm, 28, 29 Celsius. They are warmer than average by just a little bit at least. Maybe in some instances a degree Celsius warmer than average. And very importantly, the upper ocean heat content along the path of the potential core here of Lisa, that upper ocean heat content, the warm water is not just at the surface, but it extends deep down, in some cases several hundred meters deep. So there's just ample warm water for this thing to churn up and continue to feed itself. So do not be surprised if this is stronger than the 90 miles per hour that the Hurricane Center is officially forecasting for the landfall. Now what about Martin? How do we have a tropical storm here over the North Atlantic? Again, it's at about 35 degrees north latitude here and approaching 55 west. That's way up there in the Atlantic. I mean, look, there's Nova Scotia right there, for Pete's sakes. Well, the simple way to describe this is instability. There's enough cold air above the system, presumably here, that's creating a more unstable environment so that the underlying water temperatures are just warm enough to create, and this is a big key word here, convection. You've got to have that upward motion, the thunderstorms, the convection, deep convection at that. It doesn't have to be super cool, where the cloud tops are very cold, but just sustained deep convection around the center where everything's focused there, and therefore you have a bona fide tropical cyclone, a tropical storm in this case, over marginally warm enough water temperatures, but the instability is going to allow it to potentially become a hurricane. So that'll be interesting to watch over the coming days. Now, let's look at the modeling here. This is the GFS. The GFS is a global model. I want to make this very clear, especially again for our folks down in Belize that are watching. Global model means that it predicts the weather. It's called numerical weather prediction for the globe. Exactly what it means. This is just one section that Dr. Levi Cowan, who coded up this site, we call this a map extent. This particular extent area, if I can just spit it out, is the Western Atlantic. All right, so we're just looking at a snapshot of the overall global model. The GFS is not meant to be a hurricane forecasting model per se. It has other jobs. Does that make sense? The HWRF, you know that meme and what people say, you had one job. The HWRF, which I'll show you in just a moment, that is a hurricane-specific model. The GFS is not. Just want to make that clear. That being said, it is looked upon as a guidance tool, absolutely. And this area that we're looking at is the 500 millibar, 850, I'm sorry, slow down, Mark, the 850 millibar, 5,000 feet in the atmosphere, and the cyclonic vorticity right there. Let's use a color that stands out better, shall we? And that's what Lisa looks like. That's the bottom line. That's where we are. 18Z today. That's right about now. 40-something minutes after 18Z. But there it is. It looks pretty well organized in the model. It continues to get better organized all the way up to landfall. And it looks like it's a little bit farther to the north than the National Hurricane Center is indicating on their official forecast. So we'll have to see, does the guidance envelope shift more to the north? This looks like it's closer to Belize City, just so you know. All right, that's important. And then it makes landfall, cuts into the northern part of Guatemala, a big rain event there, and then it starts to rain itself out. And we'll just stop at the 72-hour mark because we're going to come back to this map in a few minutes. What does it look like on the 10-meter wind forecast? And the sea level pressure, let's move this out. Not as impressive on the GFS, and this is why I'm cautioning you. The GFS Global Forecast System, it is a small tropical cyclone. It's not as large, anywhere near the size of Ian, as an example, or Fiona. It's harder for the global models to predict and sort of see these smaller systems. It's just the way the grids are set up. We really start to get into the weeds of how modeling works. Then we get to the HWRF. And before I show you that, I want to show you this tweet. This is very important. This is from Andy Hazelton. Who is Andy? Just in case you're new. Andy, new to my videos, new to the whole process here, right? Andy is an assistant scientist down at the University of Miami, works with NOAA's Hurricane Research Division. He knows what he's talking about. So I just wanted to point that out as we go forward here. So what is he saying? Well, the HWRF from 12Z at about 700 millibars in the atmosphere, so I think that's about, what is that, about 7,000 feet or so, is showing a pretty robust hurricane late tonight, early tomorrow morning, by the time that the P3 Orion recon from NOAA is finishing up. He's saying, I'm going to take the under on that. He thinks this is overdone. But, and he put in there with that hashtag, famous last words, I don't know. I would say there's a 50-50 shot that the HWRF is onto something. We have a well-developed vortex that exists. The HWRF kind of likes that. Once you get that in the model, it helps it. It's when you get these INVEST, they haven't even developed yet. The HWRF blows those up to Category 4s. Yeah, you got to kind of say, I don't think that's going to happen. We already have a well-developed system over a very favorable water temperature profile. The upper level winds are pretty good. There is some mid-level dry air that could hamper things. So maybe that famous last words comes back to sort of haunt Andy. And he knows that. But it might be overdoing it, but it might not. We have to watch this closely. This is actually what it looks like down close to the surface. 10-meter winds and the sea level pressure there. This is right about now. And it's pretty close at 999. It moves as we move ahead here to this afternoon and evening in the overnight hours. There it is, starting to strengthen, becoming a hurricane tonight, early tomorrow morning, really deepening, developing a well-defined core. And look at what I was telling you from before. There's Belize City there. This is coming in north of Belize City, closer to the Bay of Chetumal over here. And yeah, that's a big difference between where this is coming in on the HWRF and the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center, which is closer to down here. So you take this entire ring of wind, and you're basically looking at 34 knots and higher on the scale, and you just move that north or south a couple of clicks, as they say, whatever that means, right? 10, 20, 30 miles, and that can make a huge difference in who gets what impacts. And so my point here, it is very, very difficult to know where the center and the worst conditions will be felt in Belize. And even parts of the southern Yucatan there, the Bay of Chetumal and the Chetumal region. So Everybody needs to be ready for this. That little change in heading, as we saw with Ian, it's like firing a rifle from a long distance. You change the trajectory just a little bit, a sharpshooter, right? And it changes where it hits way down the road. This is only 36 hours out, but the difference in landfall with this very small core from down here to right over Belize City, or worse would be just south of it, to this scenario where it's quite a bit to the north, means Belize City gets offshore winds, not much storm surge at all, probably an emptying of part of the Chetumal, Bay of Chetumal there, and a whole different set of problems. So we really don't know. And we're going to have to look at this again tomorrow. I'll certainly do so tomorrow morning with my morning update, and perhaps by then, yes, it could already be a hurricane, and we can fine-tune these details even more. So it goes on to make landfall, just to finish this out for you, in southern part of the Yucatan there, and the northern part of Belize near the Bay of Chetumal. Again, with offshore flow here, that's the winds coming around the backside through Belize City, a completely different scenario than if you put this making landfall just south. We have strict onshore flow, and that could be a big problem. So we don't know. Still 36 hours out. We don't know for sure. All right, looking at the GFS and going back to this part here where I said plus more development with a question mark. Yes, we could get some more development coming up. Where? Generally in this area here. Let me show you what happens. This is 72 hours. That's where we left it off. Let's move this out into time further and watch what happens by day 5. We get this enormous area of energy that tries to develop. Different pockets of vorticity try to close off. The GFS here trying to figure it all out. Just a massive pileup of air and energy, vorticity, convergence, you name it, over a very warm western Atlantic. We talked about that. And so what happens is the model depicts sort of this large gyre, big old storm sitting out there. And you say, well, that's not a big deal. It's all spread out. It doesn't look too threatening to me. Well, let's just look at the 10-meter winds. And look, this is important. We're talking hundreds of miles of fetch here. And where does that fetch conclude or terminate? In the Florida Peninsula, the east-facing beaches. Even the Bahamas down here could get in on that. 1001 pressure here. And if we back this out regionally and show you what it looks like on the big picture, oh yeah, that's the problem. 1044 millibar high over Canada. 1001 millibar low over and just east of the Bahamas. That is what we call, everybody at home, you know it, play along with me, pressure gradient. Those of you that know meteorology, you've already said that. And that's what that is. The squeezing, the gradient, the difference in pressure over distance. We have to watch this closely because if that low is even deeper, in other words, if the pressure is lower, that pressure gradient could be even stronger. And while we don't have this big, giant hurricane coming that's got everybody talking about it, you have a much larger area with no name. It's just a low pressure area over the Atlantic, creating days of onshore flow. The king tide's coming, I believe. I got to look into that. Many high tide cycles. So, Outer Banks of North Carolina, Charleston Harbor, all the way down to potentially the east coast of Florida, getting in on a long duration event. That's the next system we need to watch as we progress through the first 10 days here of the month. All right? So a lot to keep up with for sure as we go forward. So again, we'll watch Lisa. That's our number one concern. I will have an update in the morning. I will look at the H-Wharf at that point in time. We'll take a look at the overall guidance package as well and try to hone in because we will be less than 24 hours out, of course, before landfall there. And by the way, if anybody down in the Belize area has a home webcam that you stream with, especially if it's on the Nest system, like what we use for our live cams, put a comment in the YouTube comments or email me. I'll put my email in the description of today's video, and we'd love to be able to show it. If you get video from the area, etc., could show that as well. Just be sure you stay very, very safe. You don't need to try to go viral and put your life at risk. There's no reason for that. But especially if you do have a webcam, like a house cam, something along the beach or whatever, and especially, too, if it's Nest, because we could actually ingest that and show it on our interactive map. So if you've got one of those or you know somebody that does, get in touch, and we'll be glad to sort of integrate it in and show the world if you're so willing to let us do so. All right? Appreciate it in advance. All right, let me get this online for you. Again, very active period. A lot to keep up with, that is for sure. You all have a great rest of your Tuesday. As always, thanks for tuning in. Again, I am Mark Stott with HurricaneTrack, and I'll be back with more for you tomorrow morning.